Now, I only made 10 extra copies. If they're all out from back there at the back, I've got 10 extra copies and then whatever was left there. Brother Austin, do you mind opening us up with a word of prayer? All right, if you need a copy for this morning, if you'll just raise your hand. And those copies that Marcus is giving out is also this morning and next week's. So it'll have material for next week. Now, as we start our study this year, we're wanting to study about the life of Christ. I want to ask you a question, and I need some responses here. I need somebody to tell me one particular person in the last decade, in the last 10 years, who has truly shaped the world in the last 10 years. Can anybody name one person? Or good or for bad? Well, you can. I mean, no. I'm asking for one person in the last 10 years. Seth.
Mark Zuckerberg.
All right, Mark Zuckerberg in the last 10 years has reshaped the world. Okay, let's extend it to 50 years. Who can tell me one person who's been alive for that entire span and has reshaped this world in the last 50 years? Martin Luther King Jr. Okay. All right, so we have somebody that's, all right, let's go to 100 years. Henry Ford. Okay, assembly line and the production automobile and different things like that. Let's go back, let's go 250 years. Abraham Lincoln. All right, I mean, we go back 250 years, what are we celebrating this year as a country? Our 250th year. That's kind of crazy to think about, isn't it? That's just a short span of time. Let's go back 1,000 years. Who in the last 1,000 years has completely reshaped the world? All right, Thomas Edison. Marcus, I know you have somebody. Genghis Khan, okay. Who else? Gutenberg and the printing press. But what begins to happen in the last 10 years, we could have named how many people in the last 10 years? Oh, we could have named several, right? Because that's the time frame in which we live. Many of you, for 50 years, you could name several because you've lived for those 50 years. Some, I'm not going to say who, but some are closer to the 100-year mark than I am. And he and I were discussing just earlier that he's turning 91 on the 31st of this month. But I'm quite certain Brother Foy could give me a whole list of names for the past 100 years, but it becomes a little bit more difficult for me in 100 years. It becomes, now as a student of history, I know a little bit more about the 250 years. But you go back 1,000 years, that name pool does what? It narrows, doesn't it? Because our acknowledgement, our understanding of different individuals 1,000 years ago becomes very small. Now name one individual throughout the course of human history that has truly changed it all. Jesus. That's profound, isn't it? That's impact, that's influence. Dr. James Allen Francis, in a sermon in 1926, wrote this poem. Here is a man who, born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman, he worked in a carpenter's shop until he was 30, and then for 3 years he was an itinerant preacher. He never held an office. He never owned a home. He never wrote a book. He never had a family. He never went to college. He never put his foot inside a big city. He never traveled more than 200 miles from the place where he was born. He never did one of the things which usually accompanies greatness. He had no credentials but himself. While he was a young man, the tide of public opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. He was turned over to his enemies. He went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves. While he was dying, his executioners gambled for the only piece of property he had on earth. That was his coat. When he was dead, he was laid in a private grave through the pity of a friend. 19 wide centuries have come and gone, and today he is the central figure of the human race and the leader of the column of progress. I am far within the mark when I say that all the armies that have ever marched and all the navies that have ever been built, all of the parliaments that have ever sat and all of the kings that have ever reigned put together have not affected the life of man upon this earth as that one solitary life. And that is the course of our study this year. We want to talk about Jesus. We want to learn more about him and how he is the greatest manifestation of God's glory here on this earth. So we begin our study this morning looking at the beginning of the Gospels. Now, someone read for me Matthew Chambers. You got Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4.
Luke 1, 1 through 4. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of these things, of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the exact truth about the things you have been taught.
All right, so the author of our material, and we're just going to go straight through the questions that deal with these different sections of this first lesson. What do you think motivated Luke to produce a written record of Jesus' life in words? What do you think was his motivation? All right, there's a need for it. All right, to set the record in order, in consecutive order. So there was a need for it. What else do we see?
He was writing specifically to an individual about it.
All right, so he's writing to Theophilus, and we'll talk about that in a couple of questions. But still, yet there may be a reason that he's writing just specifically to Theophilus and the various things that's going on there. So there's a need. He's writing to a specific individual. What else do you see, Brother Roger?
Which things have been fulfilled.
All right, which things have been fulfilled. The New American Standard, which things have been accomplished. The literal there is which there is a full conviction. The idea there in verse 1 is Luke is not writing some fairy tale. This isn't once upon a dream or once upon a time. No, these are factual accounts. These are things that he has investigated. And I think that's, well, let's go back to you guys. What else do you see as his motivation? All right, he has a perfect understanding. Of course, Luke's going to be influenced and inspired by the Holy Spirit. Matt, you were going to say something?
The emphasis on eyewitnesses.
All right, the emphasis on eyewitness. Why is that important?
They have a first-hand account, making sure he gets a thorough account of what they saw.
All right, so he's not just basing this on hearsay. He's not dealing with gossip. He's going back to the eyewitness accounts. Brother D.I.
He was also a doctor, and doctors are to be very diligent in their paperwork.
Okay.
Documenting what they see. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not.
No, I think so. I think so. So just his profession, we know that he is a physician. And being a physician, I would think that typically if we go in to see the doctor, we want the doctor to be very smart or very dumb. We want him to be smart. Typically, if I want to go see Trey, I want to know and trust that Trey's going to, he's smart, he's going to take care of me. I don't want to go see the guy that's working the McDonald's drive-thru. But, I'm not going to go ask him about my kidney functions. There's a vast difference between those two. Brother Frank, you were going to say something else.
I know this. He says, this is what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is what happened. And I'm going to tell you what happened.
All right.
I'm sharing with you what I know.
All right. He's sharing it, and he's sharing it with Theophilus, but ultimately, by God's grace and through preservation, he's sharing it with everybody. Miss Beth, you were going to say something?
Along with Simeon, he studied the scientific method,
Mm-hmm.
which is proof, and that's what he's got here.
Absolutely.
He wants that put out.
And that was one of my main things when I look at the Gospel of Luke, is I see a man who was determined to know the truth of the matter, the facts. He's not driven or motivated by the as we've been studying in 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus this past quarter in this old Bible class. So much of what Paul warned Timothy and Titus was not to deal with those controversial things, those endless genealogies. That's not what Luke does. Luke is very precise. Any other things about his motivation? Yes, brother.
Another thing that I noticed is, in this is he in verse 3, he says he's going to write to him in order.
Yes, yes.
He's going to put these things in an order where a lot of the others, Gospels, I think, maybe overlapping planes, I guess you could say.
Yes. Well, and we're definitely going to see that as you journey through the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Those three are the synoptic Gospels because they are the most similar to one another. And all four of the Gospels give to us the life of Jesus. But those three particularly share so much in common. But yet, if you read through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you're going to come to points to where you say, well, wait a minute, Matthew's Gospel, he says this same thing over here. In Mark's Gospel, he says it over there. And then Luke's Gospel, he says it right here. Well, which one's which? One of the ways that I've always taken those types of because they're not inconsistencies at all. Jesus said the same thing multiple times. I think about that with the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain in Luke chapter 6 and 7. The Sermon on the Plain is very different from the Sermon on the Mount, but there's a lot of similarities between the two. Jesus said the same things multiple times. So that's one of the cases there. Brother Foy,
Luke said it seemed good to him to write this. Do you think that was inspired by the Holy Spirit? Him having that feeling?
I don't know if it could be. It could be. I think that the Holy Spirit, in the way inspiration works, you think about this with 1 Corinthians chapter 2, where Paul says, taking spiritual thoughts with spiritual words and combining, that's how the inspiration occurs. But the Holy Spirit has to have a vessel that is willing. And I think what the Holy Spirit finds in Luke is a vessel that was willing to write this down, willing to put in the time and the effort. That's the way I would look at that. Yes.
Putting on, Matthew and Mark, that their short, their accounts are similar, Luke's are they eyewitness to the same, Luke is going out and writing his his eyewitness.
Yes.
So is that saying that Matthew and Mark also too?
I think so.
Eyewitness?
I think so. So let me get to this because I think this kind of ties in. How is Luke's gospel different from the other writers' accounts?
I was going to say on that one was that Luke's account is through the eyewitness accounts, that the others just put it down in work.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's true. How many of you know about the four blind men fell into a pit, and they fell and they began to describe what it is that was in the pit with them, and they all described various different things, but they're all four describing what? Parts of the same thing. And I think that's the way I look at the Gospels. The Gospel writers, all four, are very different from one another. When you think about the Gospel of Mark, Mark is possibly not an eyewitness to the ministry of Jesus, depending on how you take Mark 14, 51, and 52, and the man who was there in the garden who had the linen sheet, and the linen was taken from him, and he ran away naked. that possibly could be Mark there in Mark 14. And if that is Mark, well, Mark at least has some inclination, but Mark is motivated by the sermons of Peter, I believe. And Mark writes from that perspective. Matthew, of course, is who? He's a tax collector and he is a disciple of Jesus. So Matthew writes from an eyewitness. He is an eyewitness himself, but Matthew writes primarily to who? To the Jews. So his gospel is very Jewish in flavor. How many times in the Gospel of Matthew, we've already read chapters 1 and 2, just in chapters 1 and 2, how many times does Matthew say, and this was to fulfill? It's just over and over again, because he's writing to fulfill, this is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Luke is writing in consecutive order. I don't know if it's necessarily that he's the most historically accurate, but definitely he's driven by thematics and the history of it. And of course, John is definitely an eyewitness account. He is the loved son.
That's where I was going, because immediately in this book, it goes to John 1.
Yes.
My brain goes to 1 John 1, which mirrors
Yes.
what Luke 1 says.
Yes.
We've heard, we've seen, we've looked upon, our hands have handled. We've seen, we've heard, we declare, on and on and on.
Yes.
This is certain and eyewitness.
Absolutely. 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 is what Brother Frank quoted.
Do you think the many in verse 1, the many have taken to write this narrative, that goes beyond Matthew, Mark, John, that maybe there are other people that have tried to write, and what Luke's saying is, I want to give you a thorough, accurate.
That's the way I read it. Is that when we think about first century progress of the gospel, first century, how did the early church hear the gospel? It had to be, somebody said it, spoken. Now, all people, every century has heard the gospel spoken. Hearing comes faith. But that first century, the gospel is spread through the spoken word. Then, toward the end, or toward the middle portion of the second century, now we begin to have words being written down. And those words ultimately are going to be then preserved. Those are the words that we have before us. Any other comments about the difference of Luke's gospel compared to other writers? Absolutely, and that's something we're going to talk about, especially when we get to the genealogies, is Luke's gospel is very much more Gentile, Greek in flavor versus Matthew's gospel. Any, Brother Frank?
The Gospels were writers for eyewitnesses. Luke is not.
And that is true. Out of the three, or four, excuse me.
Yeah. Those who go in were eyewitnesses, and so he uses those eyewitnesses to establish his kingdom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, this comes to the most important question of the hour. Who is Theophilus? Brother Foy, when the softball goes up, he's not going to let it fall.
He's a person that Luke knows.
It's a person that Luke knows. I'm sorry again.
He's most excellent.
He's most excellent, and that's and it seems, you know, well, why does the salutation differ between Luke to Acts? Well, Luke is, I mean, Acts is more than likely just an addendum to the book of Luke, and as such, there's no reason to salute him in the similar fashion. Now, or a continuation, not a continuation. So when we see most excellent Theophilus, what does that tell us about Theophilus? We may not know who the man is, but what are some things that we can learn from the inferences? All right, he's more than likely a high position. He's of some form of a Gentile. So we can know a little bit about him. He's a Greek. Yet lover of God, friend of God, as the material said there too. So there's something else there with Theophilus. I don't think we'll ever know And really, by the time I get to heaven, I don't want to know what Theophilus, I don't want to know about him then. I'm going to be more inclined to know other things.
One thing that impresses me here is that the Gospel of Luke obviously had an effect on theology,
Mm-hmm.
because we've got,
Mm-hmm.
it was written to an individual, and yet it's been preserved through the centuries. Obviously, he hit the mark.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Verse 4 does tell us a little bit more about him in that he has been taught these things previously.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not somebody that has no knowledge of anything. This is just to reinforce what he has been taught.
Well, and when we go to there, who more than likely had taught him? Well, Luke, but who does Luke travel with? Paul. And I think Paul's influence is here in the gospel, even there too. All right, so we get to these true and false questions. I don't have enough room to put all of the question, but I just gave, was Luke's gospel to the Jewish population only? No. Luke's gospel is more than likely being written more for the predominant Greek audience or the general audience of the entire world. Luke's gospel was written by a Greek for the Greeks. Do what? Both Gentiles. I say true to that one. I saw that as true. One question, when does Luke come into contact with Paul? Or when do we suspect he came into contact with Paul? Bible drill question. 50 points to whoever has the answer. I can't answer because I have the answer.
Wherever it starts saying we in the book of Acts.
Yeah, whenever it starts saying the we in the book of Acts, the first we is that the Macedonian call. Paul is called over to the European continent, and when he is called, that Macedonian call, we went with him. There's the first we passage. And that more than likely indicates that was Luke. Luke is with Paul at the Macedonian call. He's with Paul at Troas in Acts chapter 20. He is with him on the final leg of the third missionary journey as they return to Jerusalem in Acts chapter 21. And Luke is with Paul as he makes his way to Rome on the boat in Acts chapters 27 and 28. Those are all the we passages in the book of Acts. Was the Gospel of Luke written in chronological order?
Verse 3 says,
True. That's what verse 3 says. Now, again, when you begin to evaluate the Gospel of Luke, there's more than likely, Luke seems to be driven very much by thematics. And it seems that his narrative is driven more by the themes than it is possibly necessarily the historical accuracy at points. Now, well, Colby doesn't believe, no. Yes, it implies historical research and accuracy, but at the same time, even in that time and age, they had the leniency to, well, if this theme is connected to this theme, they'll follow the themes at the same time. Brother Matt.
And New King James does translate it orderly as well, which doesn't necessarily mean everything exactly.
Yeah, orderly. So it's just he puts together things that fit.
why is there a conclusion that Luke is a Greek?
I don't know.
I think the name is Greek.
I've got a says just the name itself. What I read is that more than likely Luke is a part of the God-fearers of the Gentiles, the ones that had already become proselytes and had a fear of the monotheistic God of the Jews, and then he became a Christian through the preaching of Paul, is what I read.
So what you said first was correct, you don't know, I don't know.
Yes. No, and I'm not going to be dogmatic about that, but that's just,
Things, even in this lesson, suppositions.
yes.
We think, or perhaps, words like that bother me when I try to be specific.
Well, and I agree with you. But I hope that everybody understands that too. I mean, what I offer you, these are my opinions. These are things that all I'm doing is I read from others and I try to put these puzzle pieces together as best as I can. And the final, most personal account of the Gospels. I put false there because you can't trump the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John, to me, is the most personal account of the Gospels because John was the disciple who laid himself upon the Lord's breast at the table. John's the one that tells us in John chapter 12 and verse 3 that when Mary poured that ointment upon his feet, the fragrance filled the house. John has very specific points of view that none of the other Gospels have. And the reason it has that is because John was with Jesus from the very beginning. Yeah, Jesus, he's there at the cross with Jesus. So there's some things about the Gospel of John that I'm going to tell you is the more personal. Again, that's subjective. That's my subjective answer to that question. All right, let's continue to move. Well, let's go to John chapter 1. Brother Jason, do you mind reading those first 18 verses for us?
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness to the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light which gives light to every man coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, and glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness of him, and cried out, saying, This was he of whom I said, He who comes after me is preferred before me, for he was before me. And of his fullness we have all received, and grace for grace. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him.
Thank you, sir. So we look at the pre-existence of Christ, and the first question that was asked here is, which came first, God or the Word? Yes. I mean, this isn't a chicken and the egg question. You can't distinguish the two, can you? Because the Word was God. The Word was not a God. The Word was not coming from a God. No, the Word was God there. Jesus was from the beginning with the Heavenly Father. Now, why do you think John begins his gospel in the beginning? What does he do? Even to the Jewish audience. The Jewish audience would have went where in their minds? In the beginning? Genesis 1:1. So just as Moses gave Israel the history beginning from creation, John says, I'm attaching my gospel to that very beginning. I'm attaching my gospel all the way back to the very beginning because that's where Jesus is from the very beginning. Jesus was not someone who came about 2,000 years later or 4,000 years later. Jesus is one who has been here from the beginning. He has been here before the beginning, and that's the point there. All right, number 6. Explain why the expression, where will you spend eternity, is ineffectual.
You won't spend it.
Okay, you won't spend it. I'll just be honest. I have nothing for that question because I think that question is possibly, I don't want to say that, it is possibly the...
Maybe extended.
Well, I just thought this question was...
Ineffectual?
Yes. That was a much kinder word than I had in my brain that I could not find one. Thank you, Brother
That's
David.
what I thought.
Yeah, so, all right, number 6 is done. All right, number 7. Why did John the Baptist come? He's the forerunner, preparer of the way, fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies concerning one who is going to come before the Christ. And,
To bear witness of the light.
all right, bear witness of the light. Now, we're going to talk about John, I suspect, a whole lot more in the coming weeks. So we're not going to spend too much time other than what's given to us about John the Baptist, primarily here in verses 6 and 8, and then down again in verse 15. Now, what is important to me, and again, this just shows John the Baptist quite often, if we're not careful, is one character of the New Testament that we kind of we skip over because we want to get to the good stuff, right? But how important was John the Baptist to be included in the prologue of John's Gospel? I mean, there's an immense importance, there's a value that is placed upon this individual to be even included. He's the only other named individual in the prologue other than Jesus himself. All right, let's get to the next one. Define tabernacle.
He was made a man in flesh and dwell among all men.
All right, so that's when Jesus becomes a man. He dwells among us. He tabernacled among us. What does it mean to tabernacle? To dwell. A temporary dwelling. Now, when we think about the word tabernacle, of course, we go back to Exodus chapter 40, and that temporary dwelling, but who dwelt in the tabernacle? God. Where did the tabernacle dwell? In the midst of the people. God's intent is always to be where? In the midst of his people. So, the tabernacle was temporary, but then at the close of the Old Testament, at the beginning of the New Testament, God has resided, he finds his residence where? Once again, in the midst of his people, through his Son, who is his incarnate. Jesus was visible, he was able to be touched and heard, and that's where I had 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Just the emphasis that John gives, not necessarily in his prologue, but at the beginning of his first epistle. What we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, and what we have looked at and touched with our hands. John is emphasizing that Jesus was not some spiritual being. Jesus was an actual flesh and blood man. He was somebody that I could reach out and I could touch. He was somebody that I saw with my eyes, I heard with my ears. All of these things are true. Now again, 1 John is written battling what? Gnosticism, which does away with the physical. And it's all about Jesus being spiritual. And John says, no. Jesus, or nene is the better terms there. Yeah, it's because the flesh is so sinful, spiritual cannot cohabitate with so all of that, that's 1 John in Gnosticism. If you need more information on that, we can talk after this. All right, any other thoughts there on tabernacle? I do think that when you think about verse 12, or verse 14, excuse me, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, here, where Israel failed through God dwelling through the tabernacle, Jesus will be successful through the flesh. Romans chapter 8. But why does God tabernacle among men? What is the end goal? What is the end results that God is intending? The church, and ultimately the church transformed in its eternal glory is going to be where? In heaven. Revelation chapter 21, if you take focus of that, what God intends all along is, once again, to be with his people. And the word and the idea of tabernacling among his people is once again found in Revelation 21. That's what God has intended all along. All right, so let's get to some of these true and false questions on this section. Which of these following statements is or are true about light? Light coexists with darkness. No. It doesn't. No. What? I'll tell you, at 8 o'clock, when I walked into this auditorium, it was what? It was dark. But as soon as I turned on the light switch, what happened to that darkness? It's gone. It's dispelled. It's vanquished. Light vanquishes darkness. It doesn't cohabitate. It does not coexist. Why does light and darkness not coexist? The darkness does what to the light? In the text in John chapter 1, it does not comprehend it. And it hates it in John chapter 3. Remember, light and darkness is another one of those themes. As we run through the Gospel of John, pay attention to how John uses light and darkness, because it is essential to understanding. Well, Jesus is the essence of light. True. Why? Because he says that. I am the light of the world. John 8 and verse 12. That pretty much solves the question for me. Well, light...
Get away from the spiritual aspect of light. That needs to be emphasized. Jesus is light.
Yes.
Others assume it's darkness.
Mm-hmm.
We just talk about light and dark. We miss
Mm-hmm.
that spiritual connection.
That's spiritual, yeah, absolutely. The spiritual connection. And that brings us to this question. Light is given to all through the gospel. Absolutely. That's what the gospel does. The gospel brings to light all that you are doing. Look with me in John chapter 3. Specifically in verse 21. Now, verses 19 and 20 are the response of darkness to light. But look at verse 21. But he who practices the truth comes to the light, so that his deeds will be manifested as having been wrought in God. We want to be in the light. What did John write about in 1 John chapter 1 and verse 7? If we walk in the light as he is the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of his Son cleanses us from all sins. We desire to be in the light most definitely. Now, light given to all through the gospel. The physical gives to us the spiritual application. John chapter 9 is the perfect example of that manifestation. The man who was born blind, darkness, was given sight, light. And how does John chapter 9 end? The Pharisees asked the question, are we too what? Are we too in the... I don't want to misquote it. Are we blind also? Because you say you are still in your sin. So there's the spiritual application. There, I think John chapter 9 is what everything is thrusting toward.
Well,
Yes, sir.
What you're saying is between the difference between light and dark is more spiritual more than physical. What we see.
I believe I think that's the point that John is making. It's not necessarily sun and night and day, but he uses that. He uses that illustration throughout his gospel. He uses it in John chapter 3. Nicodemus came to him at night. It just, a lot of that is being used by John. Yes, ma'am.
See, if you go forward to Acts chapter 2, when Peter preached the sermon and they were pricked in the heart, that's when the light hit them.
Absolutely.
And they
Absolutely.
saw what had been happening, what they had done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, Brother Matt.
Verse 9, light is given to every man.
Mhm.
That would be another verse from a predestination, contradicting predestination. Light
Yes.
is given to every man, not just some.
It's not an elect. It's not a subgroup. It's all men can be called. Yes, Brother Ron.
Paul also called the gospel, 2 Corinthians 4 says the light of the gospel, the glory of Christ.
Has shone in your hearts.
The
Yeah.
light, all the gospel of light.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and we are children of light, and we are to expose the deeds of darkness. Ephesians chapter 5, 11 through 12, Philippians 2, 13, or a little bit further down, 13 and following there. Yes, sir.
Well, that brings me back to question 6, with an ineffectual question.
Yes. Yes.
That, what I have put down for an answer for that, regarding to light and dark, is that it depends on the relationship with God that you have in this life.
Absolutely. And that would be a true question, or a true answer to that question, is it's dependent upon that relationship. Because if you're right with God, of course you're going to go. We have to move. I'm so sorry. I knew that I was going to run with time this morning, and I'm trying to get to these genealogies. Well, very quickly, did darkness extend when Jesus died? Darkness encompassed the land, Mark chapter 6 or 15. Yes. But in that darkness, light did what? Light still vanquished it. All right. Let's talk about, this last question. Oh, man. Verse 11 and 12. The giving the right to be children of God. We're going to talk about children of God and being born of God again in John chapter 3. So, all right, genealogies. Explain how there are no inconsistencies in the genealogies of Matthew and Luke, although they appear to be different. Well, they don't appear to be different. They are different. Very different from one another. Matthew begins his gospel with what? A genealogy. For the first 17 verses, he gives us 42 generations of Jesus. 3 subgroups of 14. Now, Matthew is driven by his Jewish mindset there because the Jews really liked things to be very tidy. Is that all the generations? No, it's not all the generations. And we know that it's not all the generations. Matthew skips some generations, even in the kings of the southern kingdom. He skips 3 or 4 of the kings. But the Jews like things very tidy. They like things in order. Now, when Matthew skips a generation, does it change anything? No, it doesn't. But Matthew's gospel is written to the Jewish audience, and he begins with the genealogy. Where does Luke's gospel start? It starts with Adam. And the genealogy is not until Luke chapter 3. But why does Luke write Jesus as coming all the way from Adam?
For everyone else to understand.
All right, for everyone else to understand. Remember, and I think this gives us the indication that this is written to a Gentile audience. Luke is writing his gospel from the perspective that Jesus, yes, he came to seek and to save from the house of Israel, but now through his death, burial, and resurrection, Jesus is the Savior of who? All. Jew and Gentile. And that is where we find all our common ancestry when we go all the way back to Adam. Jesus is the Savior of mankind. Not saying that Matthew doesn't make the same point. Matthew makes the same point. But the Gospels are written in different lights. And then finally, we come to that final question. What are some Old Testament prophecies that spoke of the lineage of Christ?
Very beginning, God tells Eve that you're watching where Satan had it.
All right, so that's where I started. Genesis 3 and verse 15. That's exactly where I started. Is that he is going to be born of a woman. He's going to come from the stock of Adam. So let's just trace it real quick. If he's going to come from the stock of Adam, he's going to also come through the stock of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because each of those 3 patriarchs were given the 3 promises in Genesis 12, Genesis 26, and Genesis 28. But then out of Jacob, he's going to come through the tribe of Judah. Genesis chapter 49 and verse 10, Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 14. He's going to come from the tribe of Judah. Now, who also comes from the tribe of Judah? Major player, David. And if we go to 2 Samuel chapter 7, what is David told? You're going to have a son who's going to be greater. He is going to sit on his throne for how long? Forever. Well, who's that talking about? It's not talking about Solomon. It's talking about Jesus. And you think about the descendant of David. That's a very important claim because it's used in Revelation chapter 1, Romans chapter 1 and verses 3 and 4, And know I'm missing a couple there. Any others that I overlooked? Any other prophecies that you guys have found?
Isaiah 9.
Isaiah 9, a child will be born unto us. All right.
Jeremiah 23,
All right, the branch, Jeremiah 23. Any others?
Micah 5.
Micah 5 and verse 2, that he is going to be born of Bethlehem. Isaiah 11. So, yeah, there's just on and on and on and on. Well, I appreciate so much your kind attention. That's the scope of way I hope to conduct the class. So if you'll come prepared with those answers, I hope that we may not be able to read through all the text every time, but we'll at least make our way through the text together as we discuss these things.